The Oort Perimeter, Chapter 23. Where are the Gaelic Vaughan? They should be here by now, thought Mike. Sir, Juliet Group is collapsing. The Varnock are breaking through, came a voice over the comm. Mike looked at his map of the battlefield and swore. I've used up all my reserves. We'll have to plug that hole ourselves until someone's free to take over, he thought. Command Group, follow me. We're going to help out what's left of Juliet Group, he said. Aye, came several replies. Mr. Pendleton, take us in. Aye, sir, replied Pendleton. The Sir Genius then jumped forward into the battle, followed by the rest of the ships of the command fleet. This sudden move surprised the emerging Varnock battleships, which caught the full fury of Mike's command group at nearly point-blank range. Mike's group then swept in and mercilessly strafed ship after ship of the Varnock fleet before coming around for another attack. At first it appeared as though Mike's initial attack had failed. But only moments later, several dozen of the Varnock ships exploded into brilliant balls of light and energy. Several more of their ships soon lost power and began listing or tumbling uncontrollably. Seeing this, a small group of Mike's fleet broke away and finished off the wounded enemy ships. Not long after this, several Varnock heavy battle cruisers emerged from the line just in front of Mike's fleet and charged at them. Sidney flew across his tactical controls and began locking onto and firing at multiple targets with breakneck speed as Barker and Wynne laid down a hail of defensive fire, destroying the Varnock fighters that dove in on them from nearly every angle. Sidney then released a series of torpedoes, in rapid-fire succession, that leapt from the ship and brutally hammered a nearby Varnock battleship, causing it to erupt in flames and careen out of control. Pendleton pulled up hard to miss the ship, and then flew wildly through a cloud of debris and weapons fire on the other side as he, and their two escorts, closed rapidly on a Varnock destroyer for a kill. Outside the perimeter, Mobius watched with anger as Mike's battleships utterly destroyed his latest attempt to breach Earthfleet's weakening defensive line. He studied the progress of the battle before him and frowned with disgust. It was, without a doubt, a certainty that he would soon force Earthfleet into all-out retreat. But the cost of doing so would be very expensive. Far more than he'd originally anticipated. I bet you wish you could find their commander and destroy him, don't you? I'm sure that would help you win, right? Came a voice behind him. Mobius turned and noticed that Zoan was once again lying across the top of one of his command stations in an arrogant, defiant posture. I can tell you where he is, said Zoan. Tell me, or leave, said Mobius angrily. Just then the console behind him beeped. Mobius turned around to see one ship on his display highlighted in red. It was the Sir Genius. He spun around again to look at Zoan, but found that he was gone. He turned back to the station and stared at the marker for several moments. Finally he pointed at the console and said, "Target that ship and hit it with everything you have. I want it destroyed at all costs." Pendleton banked the Sir Genius hard left as he slipped her gracefully between two attacking Varnock frigates as all three ship killers in his formation laid down a devastating rain of fire on both ships. The two frigates exploded soon after, and were gone. Mike held onto his seat as the ship shuddered under him. Pendleton swore as more torpedoes exploded against their shields, causing the ship to shudder again violently. Direct hits to the starboard rear quarter. Second and third shield layers down. Fourth is holding, but weakening, said Sidney. Mr. Pendleton, said Mike. I'm trying. But it's like flying through a fricking hailstorm, cried Pendleton. He rolled out hard to avoid another volley of torpedoes and cannon fire, and then erupted upwards through a disorganized formation of Varnock frigates as the Sir Genius, as well as her two escorts, poured a devastating hail of fire into them. Eric, can you give me more power to the shields in the starboard rear quarter? I'd like to patch those up if I can, said Sidney. I can't. Several of the emitters are blown. I've got the guys down in the engine room working on replacing them right now, replied Eric. Sidney grumbled. Well then, it looks like we'll need to favor that side for a while. Why? We've still got plenty of shield layers. Not at the rate we're going. Well then, let's fix that, shall we? We've been taking this long enough. Helm, heading 143 Mark 26. There's 2 command cruisers over there. See if you can't fly down their throat, said Mike. Aye, sir, shouted Pendleton gleefully. Sydney, as soon as we're on top of them, give those cruisers something to remember us by, said Mike. Aye, sir, replied Sydney. Pendleton turned the Sir Genius hard to the left, then under one battle group, and up through another as he charged towards the pair of command cruisers. Realizing the danger the Sir Genius and her escorts presented, several Varnock destroyers tried to cut them off. But the Sir Genius and her escorts easily avoided them, and soon drew to nearly point-blank range on the 2 command ships. All right, Sydney, smoke 'em, cried Pendleton. Aye, replied Sydney. Immediately a volley of torpedoes leapt at the 2 cruisers in front of them. The torpedoes soon hammered the 2 ships mercilessly, severely damaging both of them. The London and Ontario then came in behind him and finished them off. Pendleton immediately rolled out hard and jigged several times as he tried to escape from a now enraged enemy battle fleet. However, having grabbed the attention of nearly every single Varnock starship in the area, that was proving to be easier said than done. Hang on guys, this is gonna get bumpy, he shouted as a hail of torpedo and cannon fire poured down on them. The ship shuddered and vibrated heavily as dozens of torpedoes exploded one after another around them and against their shields. After several moments they broke free and dove back into the Earthfleet lines. All right, we're clear, said Pendleton. Well done, Mr. Pendleton. Now let's come about and take on the next group. London, Ontario, follow us in, said Mike. Sarah watched with interest as Pendleton banked the ship hard to the right and began charging at the next group of ships. However, as they did, she suddenly felt something that drove terror through her entire body like a hot knife. A mortal danger was coming, but the crew was oblivious to its approach. She immediately teleported outside the ship just in time to see a massive Varnock heavy cruiser drop out of warp just barely a kilometer off their bow. Sarah watched in cold terror as it unloaded all of its forward torpedo tubes straight at the ship at nearly point-blank range a split second later. Then, as if time had paused out of curiosity just to see what she would do, everything around here came to an almost complete stop. Realizing that saving the ship was her first priority, she turned and ordered the Sir Genius to leave the area immediately. It obeyed without question and engaged its coaxial drive, carrying all those on board to safety. She did the same with their 2 escorts. Sarah then turned her attention back to the slowly approaching torpedoes, and with a simple expression of her will, commanded the energy within them to be free. The energy gladly obeyed, erupting from their casings with glee like little sprites of fire, ripping the torpedoes apart as though they were made of dust, creating the most epic fireworks display one could ever imagine seeing. Finally, she turned her attention to the Varnock cruiser and did the same. It too exploded, disintegrating into trillions of tiny little pieces, like a puff of dust blown in the wind. Seeing that the threat had been neutralized, she returned to the ship. Moments later, time returned to normal for her once again, flowing as naturally as it had before. What the heck, said Pendleton in surprise. What is it, Lieutenant? Asked Mike. Sir, the coaxial drive just pulsed briefly and threw us clear of the battle area, replied Pendleton as he scanned his controls for clues. Say what? Said Eric in surprise. Are you sure you didn't accidentally bump the FTL controls? Asked Mike. I couldn't have. They're laid out specifically so I can't do that. I'm telling you, sir, the ship just jumped on its own, said Pendleton. Mike turned in his seat and looked at Eric. Do we have an engine problem? He asked. I don't know, sir. Everything's currently reading green across the board, even though we took some pretty good hits back there during that last pass. However, there's nothing that we experienced that would have caused the engines to just pulse like that, said Eric. Are we safe to continue fighting? Eric quickly checked his engineering console, and then gave a satisfied nod. I believe so, sir. I don't see anything that'll hinder us from diving back in, he said. Mike turned around in his chair, and said, All right then, Mr. Pendleton, get us back into the fight and link us up with our escorts. "Aye, sir," said Pendleton. Nordum strode quickly into the command center and up to Alfred. "What's the prognosis?" he asked. Alfred sighed. "Not good. We've got a hole in the perimeter big enough to throw a moon through. Our fleet is currently crumbling under intensive Varnock attack, and it appears that either the Gaek Von aren't coming, or they can't," he said. "Are you sure they got our message?" asked Nordum. "Unless the Varnock intercepted the longbow, the Gaek Von got our message. The only thing that'd stop them from coming to our aid now is either political entanglements, or something that's got them busy elsewhere. Heck, for all we know, the entire galaxy could have devolved into genocidal war by now. So, until I see otherwise, I have to assume that we're on our own out here. And, if things don't start getting better, the future of the human race isn't looking all that great right now." Nordum sighed. "And all of this because some Varnock prophet got xenophobia. How much longer before they break through and beat a path to Earth?" Alfred shrugged. "For the moment, the fleet is holding the breach, but they've suffered so many losses that it won't be long before their lines collapse, and they're forced to pull back to the Kuiper perimeter. From there it's only a question of how long that shield will hold until it's breached as well. After that it's no longer a question of if, but when Earth will be annihilated. Can't we send another couple of scout ships to call for help? I don't dare risk opening any of the other gates. There could be Varnock waiting outside, and if there are, there's a risk that they'll might find a way to come in through any gate we open to let them out." "Can't we tell if they're out there?" asked Nordum. Alfred shook his head. "If they're cloaked and on silent running, we'll probably not see them until it's too late." Nordum grunted. "So all we can do essentially is sit here and wait to die?" Alfred nodded. "I'm afraid so, sir." Just then the duty officer came running up to Alfred, and said, "Sir, we've just received a coded priority subspace message on a secret frequency." "Who is it?" asked Alfred. "We don't know, sir. They didn't send their credentials." "They didn't? What does the message say?" The officer scratched his head, and said, "Well, it really doesn't say anything, sir. It's just a series of galactic standard letters that phonetically spell out the word Patton." "Does that mean anything to you, sir?" Alfred and Nordum looked at each other, and said, "Patton?" Mobiek stood on the bridge of his command ship and grinned with devilish glee, as only a fish could do, as he gurgled and flared his gills with delighted joy. "My lord, the lines of the Chapachi are nearly at collapse," shouted one of the officers. "Continue to press the attack. Do not slacken the pressure. They must fall today, and be annihilated." "Yes, my lord." Mobiek watched with excitement as more of his ships flowed into the breach, ultimately putting ever-increasing pressure on Earthfleet's crumbling defensive lines. "Is this wise, my lord?" "We're losing a lot of ships," said his first officer. "Any losses we suffer today will be minuscule in comparison to the lives we will save in the future. The annihilation of the Chapaji will ensure that our race will endure for another 5,000 seasons," said Mobiek. Suddenly, alarms began sounding all across the bridge. "What is happening?" shouted Mobiek. "We are being attacked from behind. Gaek Von ships are appearing by the thousands. It's an ambush. The rear guard is falling." "What?" cried Mobiek. He raced over to a nearby command console and looked on in horror at a tactical display that showed a frightening picture. The unthinkable had happened. The Gaek Von had come, and with great superiority of numbers. "Withdraw all forces. Regroup on the command fleet. We must repel the Gaek Von before they destroy us."